Hey everyone, welcome to Strawberry Inc. I'm your host, Santiago, and before we get into today's story, I want to take a moment and wish you guys a happy holiday season. In addition to that, I care about my LGBTQ plus buddies. You are never excluded from the holiday season, and I hope you had a wonderful Pride Month. Wherever you are and whoever you love, this is your space too, here at Strawberry Inc. Now, today's case is one of the most disturbing and complex we've ever covered. It's about white supremacy, an awful thing, terrorism, and justice carried out in the courts. It's the story of Richard Wayne Snell, known simply as Wayne, and the crimes that shook Arkansas in the early 1980s. The white supremacy, otherwise known as white devils, is something we are still seeing to this day in the most white areas. On a seemingly ordinary day in Arkansas, Richard Wayne Snell walked into a pawn shop, accompanied by two fellow members of a white supremacist group called Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord, or CSA for short. Let me discuss these groups. They start off as political organizations, but then some start sharing extremist ideologies, therefore, it becomes a psycho group. A political organization, not all of them are bad. There are some calmer ones, such as Turn Up Columbus, which is what Charlie Kirk founded. And also, the Proud Boys was a political organization, but obviously, they too have received a criticism for being extreme. These days, it's easier to join a group like that. You just look up organizations online and sign up. They have calendars to attend their events. Wayne was joined by William Thomas and Stephen Scott. Thomas stayed outside while Scott followed Wayne inside. They believed falsely that the store owner, William Stumpp, was Jewish. In a brutal and unprovoked act, Wayne shot and killed him instantly. Strump's body was taken to the Miller County Coroner's Office. This act of hate and murder would spark a multi-agency manhunt. Before that incident, the Free had also attempted to blow up a natural gas pipeline in Fulton, Arkansas. Using dynamite, they tried to cause mass disruption, what they likely considered an act of domestic warfare. The crimes did not stop there. Arkansas State Trooper Lewis Bryant, a black officer, was later spotted by the ground. Wayne opened fire on him, killing him instantly. Trooper Bryant's body was taken to the Sevier County Coroner's Office. A truck driver who witnessed a shooting quickly contacted authorities. The Arkansas State Police launched an emergency operation to stop the suspects. They successfully disabled Wayne's vehicle. A shootout followed. Wayne was wounded, taken to the McCurtain County Memorial Hospital, chained to his bed, and then, after being stabilized, transferred to the McCurtain County Jail. Meanwhile, the FBI raided the CSA political headquarters. Both Thomas and Scott were arrested, being brought to the FBI field office of Little Rock, Arkansas. Multiple state criminal probes followed. Wayne was now tied to two state criminal investigations in Arkansas, while Thomas and Scott were only linked to a federal probe related to the pipeline bombing. Asa Hutchinson, the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Arkansas, yes, the same Asa who later became governor and a 2024 presidential candidate, announcing that he would be fighting against Trump in debates. However, Trump never made it to the debates in the beginning, and Asa would stop attending them and would eventually drop out of the race, saying he still would not support Trump. Back then, he was a prosecutor at the federal level. He announced that he would bring Thomas and Scott's probe before a federal grand jury at the Little Rock Federal Courthouse. Deputy Attorney General Jack Gillian and Assistant Attorney General Darnisa Johnson pursued Wayne's state murder charges. The charges came after grand juries in both Miller and Sevier counties indicted Richard Snell on capital murder. The prosecution also added 6 additional firearms offense charges and 1 aggravated robbery charge in the Miller case, and 5 more firearms offense charges in the Sevier case. Thomas and Scott were formally indicted in federal court. Thomas for firearms offense and Scott for an explosives offense. The state and federal prosecutions would go on to unseal the indictments reached. In the Sevier County Circuit Court, Wayne made his first appearance before Judge Rand Autry, who ordered him to remain locked up without bond. In Miller County, he had an arraignment taking place before Judge Philip Purifoy, where he pleaded not guilty. He did the same in Sevier County, but this time before Judge Herbert Wright. Thomas and Scott appeared before federal magistrate Henry Woods, who ordered them to be held in federal custody to await trial. Their arraignments took place before Judge William Overton, where both pleaded not guilty. Wayne's defense differed by county. In Miller County, he was assigned Marshall Moore and Rick Shoemaker. In Sevier County, he hired John May and Jay Metzger. Therefore, he got a Miller County public defense and Sevier County private defense. Thomas hired William Courier to defend him, and Scott hired John McAvoy, this time for the federal case, private defense. Eventually, both Thomas and Scott took plea deals, agreeing to testify against Wayne in exchange for reduced sentences. Wayne was tried twice in 1984, once in Miller County and another in Sevier County. Each jury had 12 members and 2 alternates. He was found guilty on all charges in both cases, but sentencing varied. In Miller County, the jury spared his life, sentencing him to life in prison without parole. But in Sevier County, the jury recommended the death penalty, and that is exactly what he received in the end. Thomas and Scott both testified against him. They were afterwards sentenced. Scott received 10 to 20 years in prison, and Thomas 5 to 10 years in prison. Thomas served his sentence at the Leavenworth Federal Prison in Kansas. Scott served his time at the Marion Federal Prison in Illinois. Before their releases, both were transferred to the Little Rock Halfway House. Wayne, meanwhile, was transferred to the Varner Supermax in Grady, Arkansas. He remained on death row for over a decade. In 1986, the Arkansas Supreme Court affirmed his conviction and death sentence. By 1989, all appeals were exhausted, and on April 19, 1995, Richard Wayne Snell was executed by lethal injection. The victims were honored with deep respect and solemn remembrance. On November 17, 1983, a visitation and celebration of life was held for William Stumpp at the Harnell Funeral Home of Texarkana, Arkansas. He was buried at the Memorial Garden Cemetery. Trooper Bryant was remembered with full law enforcement honors. Tragically, 4 of the Queen police officers were killed in a car crash en route to his funeral. On July 5th, Bryant's private visitation was held at the Reese Funeral Home in the Queen. A celebration of life followed on July 6th, and a public service was held on July 7th at the Queen High School Gymnasium. He was buried at Chapelwood Memorial Gardens. As for Wayne, his body was released to the Turpin Funeral Home in Stuttgart, Arkansas. A private visitation was held on April 21st and a committal the following day. He was buried quietly at the Elohim City Cemetery in Oklahoma, a known white supremacist enclave. This is a case about hate, but it's also about how justice finds its way, even when people try to hide behind ideology and violence. Trooper Bryant and William Stumpp were innocent people, taken far too soon by extremism. But their memories live on, and their stories matter. Once again, happy holidays to all, happy Hanukkah. Let's keep building a world where everyone belongs. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious. Have a good rest of your day.